Is Meghan Markle being portrayed as a modern-day Anne Boleyn without the tragic ending, or as another Princess Diana without receiving the same public affection? That is the argument author Catherine Mayer appears to make in her upcoming book Divide and Rule. The book takes a sympathetic view of Meghan, suggesting that many of her struggles stemmed from cultural misunderstandings between Americans and Britons. According to this perspective, Meghan was simply unable to bridge the gap between two different worlds. Mayer also draws comparisons between Meghan and Princess Diana, arguing that both women faced resistance from the royal institution. The question raised is whether public criticism of Meghan has been unfair and whether she is merely a misunderstood figure. Critics, however, find this explanation difficult to accept. Meghan was not an inexperienced outsider unfamiliar with public life. She spent years working in Hollywood, earned a degree from Northwestern University, and starred on a successful television series for 7 seasons. Portraying her as naive or incapable of understanding the situation seems unrealistic to many observers. Today, we will examine these claims and explore the weaknesses in this argument. Some believe the comparison relies on a misunderstanding of history and overlooks important facts. By taking a closer look, we can better assess whether these parallels truly hold up under scrutiny. The argument that Meghan Markle simply found royal life too difficult raises obvious questions. By the time she married Prince Harry, Meghan was in her mid-30s, not a young woman just beginning to navigate adulthood. She had traveled extensively, built a career in Hollywood, and spent years working in the public eye. Given that background, many critics find it hard to accept the idea that she was unprepared for the challenges that came with joining the royal family. This leads to a larger question. If other people from different countries and cultures have successfully adapted to royal life, why was Meghan's experience so different? Was the problem the palace, the media, and the institution itself, or was there a lack of desire to fully embrace the role? Some observers argue that Meghan never intended to remain a long-term working royal and instead viewed the position as a stepping stone toward opportunities in the United States. The book also attempts to draw comparisons between Meghan Markle, Anne Boleyn, and Princess Diana. However, many historians and royal commentators would argue that these comparisons are weak. While Diana's relationship with the royal family was undeniably complex, her circumstances, upbringing, and experiences were vastly different from Meghan's. Beyond occasional similarities in public scrutiny, the parallels often appear superficial rather than substantial. According to excerpts published in the Daily Mail, the book suggests there were clear signs from the beginning that Meghan's entry into royal life was destined to fail. The author points to her Californian background, personality traits, and cultural differences as contributing factors. Critics, however, argue that countless individuals have crossed borders, learned new languages, and adapted to entirely new cultures in order to fulfill royal duties. Examples frequently cited include Queen Mary of Denmark, who moved from Australia and learned Danish, and Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, who embraced Dutch culture after growing up in Argentina. Unlike many foreign-born royals, Meghan did not face a language barrier, making the cultural divide argument less convincing to some observers. The book also highlights Meghan as the first biracial member of the modern royal family and presents this as evidence of institutional progress. Critics counter that the success of a royal family member should be judged primarily by dedication, service, and effectiveness rather than identity alone. From this perspective, personal character and commitment matter far more than background or heritage. Ultimately, the debate centers on whether Meghan's difficulties were caused primarily by external forces or by her own choices and expectations. That question remains one of the most controversial aspects of discussions surrounding her time as a working royal. The article argues that Meghan Markle was expected to represent institutional change within the monarchy, but critics question whether that expectation was realistic. As the wife of Prince Harry, who was not directly in line for the throne, her role was fundamentally different from those of King Charles, Prince William, or future heirs who bear the primary responsibility for the monarchy's long-term direction. The author reflects on the optimism surrounding Harry and Meghan's 2018 wedding, suggesting that many people genuinely hoped Meghan would become a successful and valued member of the royal family. Critics, however, argue that this optimism was misplaced from the start. They believe Meghan never intended to fully commit to royal life and instead viewed the institution as a stepping stone toward larger opportunities elsewhere. One of the recurring themes in the book is the comparison between Meghan Markle and Princess Diana. Critics strongly reject this parallel, pointing out that Diana entered the royal family as a very young woman with limited life experience, while Meghan was an established professional in her mid-30s who had already built a career, traveled extensively, and experienced public life. Because of these vastly different circumstances, many observers believe the comparison oversimplifies both women's experiences. The discussion then turns to Diana's tragic death in 1997 and the public reaction that followed. In the immediate aftermath, accusations and conspiracy theories circulated widely, with some people blaming the royal family for Diana's fate. However, later investigations concluded that the crash resulted from a combination of factors, including the driver's intoxication and the failure of several passengers to wear seat belts. These findings weakened many of the more dramatic conspiracy claims that emerged at the time. Critics of the book argue that it places too much emphasis on institutional forces while overlooking the role of personal decisions and individual circumstances. They contend that Diana's story was shaped by a complex mixture of media pressure, personal choices, and manipulation by figures such as journalist Martin Bashir, whose controversial interview practices became public years later. The author also frames Diana's experiences as evidence of broader patriarchal structures within society and the monarchy. Opponents of this interpretation argue that the situation was far more nuanced than a simple struggle between individuals and institutions. They believe that reducing Diana's life story to a single ideological explanation ignores many of the personal, political, and historical factors that influenced events. Ultimately, the debate centers on whether Meghan Markle's experiences can genuinely be compared to Princess Diana's. While supporters of the comparison see parallels in media scrutiny and public attention, critics argue that the differences between the two women far outweigh the similarities, making the comparison more symbolic than factual. The discussion then shifts to the intense scrutiny that comes with royal life. The author notes that every royal woman faces constant public attention, criticism, and judgment. Critics of Meghan's complaints argue that this level of scrutiny is not unique to her, but is an unavoidable part of joining one of the world's most visible institutions. From their perspective, anyone entering royal life understands that every decision, appearance, and statement will be analyzed by both the media and the public. The article also revisits comparisons between Meghan Markle and Princess Diana, particularly regarding their relationships with the media and the monarchy. However, critics argue that these parallels continue to overlook important differences. Diana's experiences were shaped by a unique set of circumstances, including intense media pressure, personal struggles, and the controversial influence of journalist Martin Bashir, whose methods later became the subject of significant criticism. Supporters of Meghan often point to her departure from royal duties as evidence that she faced similar challenges. Opponents counter that her exit was far more public and contentious, marked by interviews, documentaries, books, and ongoing criticism of the institution she left behind. For them, the comparison to Diana remains unconvincing. Another argument presented in the book is that Meghan was a commoner who married into royalty and therefore faced resistance from an established institution. Critics respond by noting that many modern queens and royal consorts also entered royal families as commoners and successfully adapted to their roles. Examples frequently cited include Queen Mary of Denmark, Queen Letizia of Spain, Queen Sylvia of Sweden, and Queen Sonia of Norway, all of whom came from non-royal backgrounds yet became respected figures within their respective monarchies. This leads to a broader debate about Meghan's role within the royal family. Some supporters viewed her as a force for modernization and change. Critics, however, argue that her primary responsibility was to support the institution rather than redefine it. In their view, major decisions about the future direction of the monarchy belong to those directly responsible for its continuity, including the monarch and heirs to the throne. To illustrate this point, commentators sometimes compare royal service to working within any large organization. Employees may have ideas about how an institution should evolve, but ultimate responsibility for setting its direction rests with leadership. According to this perspective, tensions arose because Meghan's expectations and ambitions did not align with the traditional structure and responsibilities of royal life. Ultimately, the disagreement centers on a fundamental question. Was Meghan Markle attempting to modernize an outdated institution, or was she unwilling to accept the constraints and obligations that came with her position? The answer depends largely on how one interprets the events that unfolded during her time as a working royal and the years that followed. The article continues by describing Meghan Markle as ambitious and difficult, arguing that these qualities can be interpreted in both positive and negative ways. Ambition can drive meaningful change and inspire success, while being difficult can sometimes reflect a commitment to high standards. However, critics of Meghan argue that her behavior crossed the line from determination into unnecessary conflict, contributing to tensions within the institution. The book then attempts to draw parallels between Meghan Markle and Anne Boleyn, a comparison that many royal commentators strongly reject. Anne Boleyn lived in a completely different era, occupied a fundamentally different position within the monarchy, and played a significant role in one of the most transformative periods in English history. As queen consort, Anne's influence extended into matters of religion, politics, and the future direction of the kingdom. By contrast, Meghan entered the royal family as the wife of Prince Harry, who was not the direct heir to the throne. Critics argue that the responsibilities, expectations, and historical significance of the two women are so different that any comparison between them becomes difficult to sustain. The discussion also touches on the role of royal spouses. Historically, consorts are expected to support the institution and the monarch rather than lead it. Commentators often point to figures such as Queen Maxima of the Netherlands and other modern royal consorts who embraced supportive roles, while still developing strong public identities of their own. According to critics, one of the central tensions surrounding Meghan was her apparent desire to establish herself as a major force within the institution, rather than operate within its traditional framework. Supporters may view this as modernization, while opponents see it as a misunderstanding of how constitutional monarchies function. The article then shifts to public perception, questioning why Meghan consistently performs poorly in opinion polls compared to other senior royals. Some argue that palace briefings, media narratives, and cultural attitudes played a significant role in shaping public opinion. Others believe her reputation is primarily the result of her own actions, public statements, interviews, and decisions made after stepping back from royal duties. The comparison between Meghan and Catherine, Princess of Wales, is also examined. Critics argue that Catherine built her public image through patience, consistency, and a gradual acceptance of royal responsibilities over many years. Meghan, by contrast, is often portrayed as wanting to accelerate change and challenge established traditions much earlier in her royal career. The author suggests that the fascination with royal life reflects a broader cultural fascination with the idea of becoming a princess. Royal weddings, public ceremonies, and the enduring popularity of the monarchy continue to capture public imagination around the world. However, critics argue that this same fascination also creates unrealistic expectations about what royal life actually involves. Ultimately, the debate comes down to two competing interpretations. One side views Meghan Markle as a reform-minded outsider who encountered resistance from a rigid institution. The other sees her as someone whose ambitions and expectations were fundamentally incompatible with the realities of royal service. That disagreement remains at the heart of the ongoing discussion surrounding her legacy within the royal family. The article then shifts its focus to Meghan Markle's public image and the criticism she has faced over the years. Critics argue that one of the biggest reasons for the public backlash is the perception that she has repeatedly tried to control or reshape the narrative surrounding her life and experiences. Whether fair or not, this has led some observers to view her public statements with skepticism. The author references Meghan's former lifestyle blog, The Tig, where she wrote about topics ranging from fashion and food to social issues and personal development. The blog reflected a woman who valued independence, ambition, and self-expression. When Meghan later left both the blog and her acting career behind as her relationship with Prince Harry became serious, supporters viewed it as a sacrifice, while critics saw it as a calculated transition into a much larger public role. A key theme throughout the article is the idea of personal freedom versus institutional responsibility. Critics argue that joining any large organization, whether a corporation, government institution, or royal family, inevitably comes with limitations. Individuals may retain their voice and identity, but they are also expected to operate within established rules and structures. From this perspective, Meghan knowingly entered a system where certain expectations and restrictions already existed. The discussion also addresses claims that Meghan's presence represented a significant step forward for diversity within the royal family. Supporters viewed her background as a symbol of a changing and more inclusive Britain. Critics, however, argue that public service should be evaluated primarily through actions, effectiveness, and commitment rather than identity alone. They contend that lasting public support is earned through conduct and contribution rather than personal characteristics. The article further examines how Meghan's racial background became a major part of the public conversation. Some commentators believe race played a significant role in how she was treated by portions of the media and public. Others argue that factors such as her nationality, celebrity background, previous marriage, and outspoken public profile generated far more attention than her ethnicity. The role of Meghan's family history is also discussed, including her relationship with her parents and stories she has shared about growing up as a biracial child in Los Angeles. While many people accept these experiences as genuine reflections of her life, critics remain skeptical of some accounts, arguing that issues of race have sometimes been emphasized in ways that support a broader narrative. Ultimately, the debate comes back to a central question that has followed Meghan Markle throughout her public life. Were the challenges she faced primarily the result of external prejudice and institutional resistance, or were they largely shaped by her own choices? Expectations and approach to royal life? The answer remains deeply contested, which is why discussions surrounding Meghan continue to generate such strong reactions from both supporters and critics. The article goes on to argue that no amount of online research could have fully prepared Meghan Markle for the unusual and often complex culture of royal life. While that may be true to some extent, critics point out that Meghan's public statements often appeared designed to present herself as an outsider who had little understanding of the royal family before meeting Prince Harry. For some observers, those claims were difficult to accept given Harry's global profile and the intense public interest surrounding the monarchy. The author paints a picture of Meghan entering an unfamiliar world filled with traditions, protocols, staff, and expectations that differed dramatically from anything she had previously experienced. Supporters argue that adapting to such an environment would be challenging for anyone. Critics counter that successful adaptation requires patience, humility, and a willingness to learn before attempting to change established systems. This raises a broader point about entering any new institution. Whether it is a workplace, government, corporation, or royal household, newcomers are generally expected to spend time understanding the culture and procedures before proposing major reforms. According to critics, one of Meghan's biggest mistakes was attempting to challenge aspects of royal life before fully understanding how the institution operated. The article also explores the influence of California culture on Meghan's worldview. The author suggests that California's emphasis on self-expression, entrepreneurship, personal branding, and optimism helped shape her approach to public life. These qualities can be valuable, but critics argue they sometimes clashed with the more restrained and tradition-focused culture associated with the British monarchy. Cultural differences are certainly real. Communication styles, attitudes towards self-promotion, and expectations surrounding public behavior vary significantly from one country to another. Adapting successfully often requires observing, listening, and learning from those already familiar with the environment. Many commentators point to this process of gradual adjustment as a key factor in the success of numerous foreign-born royal family members throughout Europe. The discussion also touches on Meghan's career in entertainment and her experience building a personal brand through projects such as the TIG. In Hollywood and related industries, maintaining a public profile and promoting oneself is often considered a professional necessity. Critics argue that this approach can conflict with the expectations placed on members of a royal family, where the focus is traditionally intended to remain on service and institution rather than personal celebrity. According to this perspective, the challenge was not simply a clash between America and Britain, but a deeper conflict between two very different approaches to public life. One model prioritizes individual achievement, personal branding, and self-expression, while the other emphasizes duty, continuity, and representing something larger than oneself. Ultimately, the debate comes down to whether Meghan Markle's difficulties stemmed primarily from cultural misunderstandings or from an inability to adapt to the unique demands of royal life. The article presents California as a major part of the explanation, while critics argue that countless people have successfully adapted to unfamiliar cultures and institutions by approaching them with patience, flexibility, and a willingness to learn. The author argues that Meghan Markle struggled to adapt to royal life because of cultural differences between America and Britain. However, critics question that explanation, noting that Meghan married Prince Harry in her mid-30s after years of professional experience, international travel, and a successful acting career. They argue that she was not an inexperienced young woman entering an unfamiliar world, but someone who had already spent years navigating public life and media attention. The debate centers on whether Meghan's difficulties within the royal family were caused primarily by the institution itself, the British press, and royal traditions, or whether they stemmed from her own approach to royal life. Some commentators believe Meghan never intended to fully embrace the role expected of a senior royal and instead viewed the position as a stepping stone toward greater opportunities in the United States. Comparisons between Meghan Markle and Princess Diana are also frequently challenged. While both women faced intense media scrutiny, critics argue that their circumstances were fundamentally different. Diana entered royal life as a very young woman with little life experience, while Meghan was a mature adult with an established career and previous marriage. Because of these differences, many believe the parallels between the two women are often overstated. The discussion ultimately reflects a broader disagreement over Meghan's legacy. Supporters see her as a modern woman who struggled against an outdated institution, while critics view her departure from royal duties as evidence that she was never fully committed to the role in the first place. The author questions whether palace culture can truly explain Meghan Markle's difficulties within the royal family. Critics argue that if palace culture were the primary problem, similar conflicts would be common among other royals. Instead, they point out that most members of the family have managed to work within the institution despite its complexities and limitations. The discussion also raises the issue of comparisons with Prince Andrew. Critics argue that pointing to Andrew's controversies does not excuse or diminish allegations made against Meghan. In their view, multiple problems can exist at the same time. Criticism of Andrew's conduct and criticism of Meghan's behavior are not mutually exclusive. Another argument explored is whether Meghan's public image was affected by cultural differences. Some suggest that her California background, modern activism, and outspoken style may have clashed with more traditional British expectations. Others believe these factors alone cannot explain the level of criticism she received. Instead, they argue that concerns about her conduct, leadership style, and relationship with royal staff played a larger role in shaping public opinion. The book presents Harry and Meghan as two optimistic individuals who hope to redefine what royal service could look like. However, critics counter that significant institutional changes are typically driven by senior leadership rather than junior members of the organization. They argue that Meghan and Harry attempted to reshape their roles without fully understanding the structure they had joined, creating tensions with both palace officials and other members of the royal family. According to this perspective, the conflict was not simply about tradition versus modernity. Rather, it reflected a deeper disagreement over responsibilities, expectations, and the limits of personal independence within a centuries-old institution. Supporters see Harry and Meghan as reformers who encountered resistance, while critics view them as individuals who struggled to adapt to the realities of royal life and ultimately chose a different path. The author questions whether palace culture can truly explain Meghan Markle's difficulties within the royal family. Critics argue that if palace culture were the primary problem, similar conflicts would be common among other royals. Instead, they point out that most members of the family have managed to work within the institution despite its complexities and limitations. The discussion also raises the issue of comparisons with Prince Andrew. Critics argue that pointing to Andrew's controversies does not excuse or diminish allegations made against Meghan. In their view, multiple problems can exist at the same time. Criticism of Andrew's conduct and criticism of Meghan's behavior are not mutually exclusive. Another argument explored is whether Meghan's public image was affected by cultural differences. Some suggest that her California background, modern activism, and outspoken style may have clashed with more traditional British expectations. Others believe these factors alone cannot explain the level of criticism she received. Instead, they argue that concerns about her conduct, leadership style, and relationship with royal staff played a larger role in shaping public opinion. The book presents Harry and Meghan as two optimistic individuals who hope to redefine what royal service could look like. However, critics counter that significant institutional changes are typically driven by senior leadership rather than junior members of the organization. They argue that Meghan and Harry attempted to reshape their roles without fully understanding the structure they had joined, creating tensions with both palace officials and other members of the royal family. According to this perspective, the conflict was not simply about tradition versus modernity. Rather, it reflected a deeper disagreement over responsibilities, expectations, and the limits of personal independence within a centuries-old institution. Supporters see Harry and Meghan as reformers who encountered resistance, while critics view them as individuals who struggled to adapt to the realities of royal life and ultimately chose a different path. The speaker argues that Meghan Markle's difficulties within the British royal family were largely the result of her own actions rather than racism, media hostility, or palace conspiracies. According to the commentary, Meghan entered royal life without fully understanding or respecting its traditions and hierarchy, and instead of adapting to the institution, she attempted to change it. The speaker contrasts her experience with that of other royal women, such as Queen Maxima of the Netherlands and Queen Mary of Denmark, who are presented as examples of individuals who successfully adjusted to royal responsibilities. The commentary further claims that Meghan sought attention, influence, and personal branding rather than focusing on royal service, and that many public criticisms of her stem from her behavior, interviews, and public statements rather than her background or race. The speaker also discusses Prince Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties, arguing that the couple tried to redefine their roles without the support or approval of senior members of the royal family. Comparisons between Meghan and Princess Diana are rejected, with the speaker insisting that the two women faced very different circumstances. The commentary suggests that Harry views his mother through an idealized lens, while Prince William is portrayed as having a more balanced understanding of Diana's strengths and flaws. Throughout the discussion, the speaker maintains that Meghan's public image problems were self-inflicted and that her attempts to present herself as a misunderstood figure have not been convincing to many critics. Ultimately, the commentary concludes that Meghan's departure from royal life was driven more by personal ambition and dissatisfaction than by external pressures from the monarchy or the media.